The gospel is centered on Jesus. The gospel is centered on Jesus. How does Peter start? Men of Israel. He's not just addressing males, but pretty much until the last 30 or 40 years, throughout human history, when you say man's greatest need is this, you're not speaking of males, you're speaking of mankind. So even when he says men of Israel, he's talking about people. People of Israel. Men of Israel, hear these words. This was an orator's way to start. He said, everyone that can hear me, listen up. I'm going to tell you what's going on. In Ecclesia, how does he start? Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus is a name that means God is salvation. It is talking about a specific person. It's talking about Jesus the Christ. Christ is not his name, that's his title. He's the Christ. He's the anointed Savior and King. Jesus is his name. The angel told Mary and Joseph, you're going to name him Jesus because he will save his people from his sins. And we know, as we even just look through the Gospel account of Mark, that Jesus claimed to be and proved to be God in the flesh. He's truly God and truly man. And Peter is drawing these people to him. He said, men of Israel, Jesus, okay, which Jesus? Of Nazareth. A small town in the northern part of Israel. You knew who they were talking about. He's explicit. This is who I'm talking about. Jesus from the rural hick town in northern Galilee of Nazareth. The whole gospel centers in, and we can't skip over stuff like that because his first words are not, hey, here's something good to tell you to help your life. He says, men of Israel, Jesus of Nazareth. The whole gospel centers around Jesus. He said, a man, in the second part of verse 22, a man attested to you. That would be someone presented to you with sufficient evidence. Presented to you in a way that you could actually see. So you get it. He's been presented to you, but notice where he grounds it. By God. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you, presented to you with plenty of evidence, attested to you by God. So right from the beginning, do you see what Peter's doing with these Jewish men and women who believe in God, who won't even say the name of God, the personal name, Yahweh, that we find in the Old Testament? That's what God says his name is. They won't even say it out loud. That is how much they revere God. They won't say his name. And so they usually here he's talking and he just says God, but they know he's talking about. He's talking about the God of the Bible, but he says, Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God. You see what he's saying? He's saying, the one who created everything, the one who created you, the one who has orchestrated history and times and seasons, the one that we live and move and have our being in, God, the creator and sustainer, has attested, proven Jesus to you. With, how did he do it? With mighty works and wonders and signs. Well, this is the life of Jesus. Jesus finds 5,000 people before him in a desolate place, and they have no food, and Jesus just says, that's cool, I'll feed them. He feeds 5,000 people with a Lunchable. A storm has come upon them at sea, and Jesus says, sit down and shut up. To a hurricane, and it does it. Jesus constantly proves he is God. He does command everything, and so that's what he means. God himself has worked through Jesus to present to you in a way that you should understand through his ministry, through the signs and wonders, the miraculous things he's done, definitely through the resurrection. Notice again, that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. It's like, I'm not telling you something you don't know. You know everything I'm saying. You know what Jesus did. You know what he said. And you need to connect the dots. God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. God raised him up, talking about his resurrection, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. Peter's sermon begins by emphasizing the main point of the gospel. I want you to think about this. This is just the main point of the gospel. It's a coin, and it has two sides, what the gospel is. On one side of the coin, it's Jesus, who he is and what he's done. He is God, become a man, truly God, truly man, who lived without sin so we could be counted righteous. He died for sin so that we could be forgiven and not have to bear the penalty that we deserve. And then he arose from death to life, conquering Satan, sin, and death, and proving, I did live for your righteousness, I did die for your sin, and now I'm back alive. Death has no dominion over me. I'm your Savior, I'm your representative. Do you notice that that's what he points out? A man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs, there's his life, that God did through him in your midst. This Jesus delivered up, according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. But then the resurrection, God raised him up. There you go. Jesus' life, Jesus' death, Jesus' resurrection. Do you see that's where he starts? That's the gospel. That's number one. That's one side of the coin. Who he is, what he's done in his life, death, and resurrection. And the other side of the coin is the creator and sustainer of everything and everyone has done this. It's not Jesus as an abstract, minister of God. It's God himself has done this, and that's why he says, attested to you by God, that God did, as you yourselves know. God raised him up. He died on a cross according to the definite plan of God. So the gospel is this simply, what Jesus has done in his life, death, and resurrection, and it's all done by God. The gospel is a decisive action of the creator of the universe to invade human history and save us by grace. Do you see how silly it is to have a gospel that's presented and really man is the focus ultimately? See how silly that is? It's not something that you do for God. It's something that God does for you, outside of you, despite you. God decisively does it in and through Jesus. The whole gospel is centered on Jesus of Nazareth, whom God worked through to bring about our reconciliation with him. The gospel is about God saving us through Jesus. Now imagine, I might cough a few times, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get over a sinus infection. Forgive me. Imagine reading a story about a place called Metropolis. You ever heard of Metropolis? Hopefully, even if you're not a comic book nerd, like one member of my household, you still know what Metropolis is. Now, you read this story, and it talks a lot about the workings of Metropolis and the things that are going wrong, and maybe some things that we could do right, but it never really gets to Clark Kent, Superman. Can you imagine how pointless it would be to read just a comic book or any kind of story about Metropolis and what's happening, and the writer just never gets to Superman? He never gets to Clark Kent taking off his glasses and putting on his tights and assuming that role of Superman and saving the day. The reason we know what Metropolis is not just because, oh, that's a really cool fictional city that's maybe based off a real city, and there's bad stuff, and then there's good stuff that happens, and the day is saved. None of us really care about that. We care about Metropolis because Superman lives there and saves the day countless times. It'd be the most boring story ever if we didn't get to Superman. In the same way, it is pointless to preach the gospel, talk about the gospel in your conversation without aiming to get to Jesus and showing your friends, your family, your coworkers, that the whole Bible, the whole gospel is about Jesus. When we talk about God, get to Jesus. You don't know God apart from Jesus. In Jesus Christ, we have the image of the invisible God, as the writer of Hebrews says. He's the image of the invisible God. Paul says that in Colossians 1 as well. He's how we know what God is like. It's Jesus. If you're going to talk about the gospel and you're not talking 99% about Jesus, what are you doing? What are we doing? The gospel is, first of all, centered on Jesus. Jesus said that it was. He said, you're saved through me. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Do you notice he doesn't say, I'm the one who makes the way. I'm the one who gives you the truth. He says, no, I am the way in and of myself. You come through me. Not, I'm the one who opens the door for you. Go. He says, no, you come through me. I am the door. I am the way. The gospel is first of all centered on Jesus.